Hi, friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Raheel. I'm an entrepreneur and a product leader currently living and working in Dubai. I wanted to create this video because 2024 is coming up, and a lot of you guys are thinking where you should start your career. And as I've been reflecting, this is kind of like an advice that I would give my 23-year-old who's just graduating from college. And that advice would be very simple is to go work at a startup versus a big company. I know this is a very sort of a contentious little topic, right? Raheel, why shouldn't I go work at a big company? It has more perks, more benefits, better salary, and all that jazz, right? But give me some time to change your mind. And I will list you around 5 reasons why considering to work at a startup in the longer run is much better for your own personal career growth versus working at an established company and trying to climb the ladder. So let's start with the first reason, which is growth plus skills. Man, when you're in a startup, which is a high functioning startup, it has a good potential. The amount of work that you'll do in 6 to 12 months is going to be greater than what you'll ever do in an established company uh, in the next 5 years. It's fast paced, you're working on cutting edge stuff, you're building for the real user, you're on the ground trying to build stuff. So the amount of skills that you'll have to learn along the way and the learning curve is going to be extremely steep. But at the end of the day, you'll come out of it as a very, as a professional, as someone who knows how to get shit done. And this is exactly what differentiates doers versus pretending to be doers is that you will learn how to generate results. And that brings me on to my second point, which is when you're working at a startup, you're not just building a product, you're part of something bigger. So, for example, if you were working at Facebook back in 2007, 2008, you were trying to connect the world. If you were in YouTube, you were trying to bring video to the entire world. And one thing that drives the early people who are working at a startup is the mission of the startup. It's something that is bigger than you are, and I think that is very powerful. When you're in a big company, fine, you're doing stuff, right? But at a startup, there's a small little mission that you have, which is either to change the world for the better, to introduce a new technology that would really transform how we live. Whatever you do at a startup is always challenging what the status quo looks like. And it's much better to challenge the status quo than be a part of the of the status quo. And I think when you're at a startup, this idea of belonging and the idea of working together to change status quo, I think it's extremely powerful. And that is not something you get at an established company unless and until you're working at a farm company. I think that's a good starting point, but other than that, I would highly recommend spending your time go into startups. And within startups, it's not like you can just go and work at any startup. You have to choose a startup. You have to figure out which startup aligns with your mission, which startup does not, which startup is doing well at the moment, where you want to play around, what sort of roles and responsibilities you want to have. And then based on that, you will shortlist the startup that you want to work in. But around the world currently, the culture has been phenomenal. And so my second recommendation is to go work at a startup. Forget about that big company, man. Now, the third the third reason why you should actually join a startup is the impact that you'll be making. So let's say, for instance, you're working on an application that connects you know uh, elderly people with care. Now, it's a very high risk sort of a proposition. There's a 90% chance, according to the statistics out there, that your startup might fail, right? It might run out of money, the founders won't last longer, the product is not going to work in the market. But just consider for a second that if you're able to successfully solve this problem, the impact is huge. So, whenever you're working at a startup, the proposition is not simple, the impact is not small, and if you actually become successful, the upside, the impact that you'll be making is tremendous. So I would rather work at something that is working towards something bigger versus just being a small part in a big machinery. And that is where the impact part comes in. When you're working at a startup, the impact that you're able to make from a startup point of view is immense. But now let's talk about the impact that you will be able to make at the job. Since startup is comprises of a very small set of people, every every little thing that you'll do in a startup will have an impact. You are not just a small little part in a big machinery, but instead you're a big part, critical part in a small machinery that is becoming bigger as time goes by. So your work will have an impact. Every little decision that you'll make, you will be able to see its results. It's not like you can hide behind 5 layers of bureaucracy and you put out a PowerPoint never to be seen again. Your real competence comes in. Which brings me on to my fourth reason, which is there's no bullshit in a startup. The level of competence that you will be able to reach while working at a startup is immense. Think about this. You start a campaign at a startup that will generate results in the next 2 weeks. If it doesn't, you'll know if it didn't really work. Versus at a bigger company, you're working on a 6 month cycle. After 6 months, you launch it and you'll test it for the next 4 months. It's going to take 10 months before you get to the actuality of whether the campaign was successful or not. But at startup, because you're experimenting a lot, you're moving at a very fast pace, you will be able to not only understand the impact of your actions, but you will be able to see how competent your decision making is, which gives you the feedback you need to improve yourself. So for example, you launch a campaign, 2 weeks bombs, doesn't work out. It's okay, you got real feedback. Now you can go back and you can come up with a better iteration of that campaign and try to make it successful for the next time. So the level of growth that you're getting and the level of competence that you're achieving is tremendous. You won't get the level of ownership anywhere if you work for a bigger company. And now think about this: when you're coming out of college or when you're just starting your career, you're at a startup, you're given more responsibilities, and the steps that you're actually making are impacting, and you're able to see those results in a very short amount of time. The feedback loop is so fast that you're consistently improving. And I think that is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. Which brings me on to my fifth part, which is the risk and the reward. Right now, let's talk about this. No one has ever become rich by working simply at a bigger company. There's a very small chunk of people who actually are able to climb the ladder. The competition is too high, and it just has a lot of politics involved. I would rather not get involved with it, but who has the time to work for the next 25 years? Gen Z, our generation, does not kind of function like that. We want results, we want quick results, but we also want to do impactful work, which is why the level of risk that you're taking at a startup is immense. But what about the upside? The upside is uncapped. The maximum that you lose is, so if you work at a startup for 3 years, the maximum you're going to lose is 3 years worth of salary. It's as simple as that. But what you've gained over the 3 years, you can actually utilize that information to make a much better impact after you leave your job at a startup, for example. Or if the startup fails, you can go on, start another startup or join another startup that is at a much higher series, is a little bit more stable for your taste. But the equity option that you're going to get at a startup, the amount of money that you can make in the long run if that startup becomes successful, automatically there is no cap to it. Which is why if you think about the risk and reward curve, it's actually pretty simple. You have to take more risk to get more reward. You cannot say that your risk is also capped. If your risk is capped, automatically your reward will be capped. So you have to take a tremendous amount of risk. And the best way to take a risk is joining a startup that is either in series A, series B. Now let's digress for a moment. And when you look at startups, right? So startups are very early stage. These are like baby startups, seed stage startups. Then you have series A startups. These are startups that have proven that they can actually make money, but they're still really small. They've raised about $5 to $10 million, maybe $15 million in capital. Then you have series B, series C, series D. And as you increase in these series, basically that startup is becoming mature and is converting itself into a company. Ideally, the maximum risk that you can take at a startup is at the seed stage. Okay, when it's very early, when there's 50 10 to 15 or 25 people that are working in that startup. But as you move up, you can reduce your risk while keeping the upside. So I would highly recommend looking at, if you're starting off, looking at series A, series B, series C startups, right? Startups that have raised 50 to 100 million dollars in venture capital. They have a solid product in the market. They're growing at a tremendous pace. So this is kind of like the series that you can go for, and this is where you can make a lot of money, because you'll be getting options within the company, right, which are shares. And with each coming round, the value of those shares basically increase, right? So if you look at early employees of Facebook, if you look at early employees of Kareem, right? This is how they became rich. They did not become rich through their salary, but they became rich when their shares were liquidated. And your chances of getting richer from a startup are much higher, I think, versus if you go work at a traditional, company for the next 25 years, which then again isn't a bad thing, but the reward is uncapped at a startup. So I think if I was starting my own career in 2024, I would go choose a high functioning startup to work at, because the amount of learning that I'm going to have, the amount of work that I'll do, the skills that I will gain, the smart people that I'm going to surround myself with, the reward that I'm setting myself up for is going to be tremendous. But now there's another side to it as well, right? Raheel, why wouldn't I want to join a startup? So, if you're kind of like a risk averse person who doesn't really want to take a risk, you don't want to consider, you don't like uncertainty too much, you don't like fast pace a lot, you don't like chaos a lot, right? Then the startup life is not for you, right? You need to have a certain level of setting up or managing ambiguous situations. You need to have a certain sense of you need to have a higher risk appetite to go into the startup world. You need to understand the idea of ownership and basically not dealing with any bullshit. If you're kind of a person who just likes to take a chill pill, doesn't like the fast life, he's fine climbing the ladder, wants to enjoy the weekends with the friends, then yes, definitely don't go for a startup. But when you're young, when you're just out of college, you have that energy, right? The only thing that you should be concerned about is the amount of growth that you want to go for. So my suggestion to you is to go work at a startup. If you're in India, go work for the Indian tech startup scene is amazing. Go work for a startup. If you're in the UAE startups are taking off like crazy, and the MENA region is an explosive place for startups to grow. Work at a startup. If you're in the Silicon Valley, in the US, Canada, you have some tremendous startups that are doing really good for society, and I really think you should go join them. So quickly recapping, the reason why you should join a startup if you're starting your career in 2024: growth, the skills that you learn, you'll be part of a bigger mission. The impact at the job that you'll be making is going to be tremendous. The You can't hide incompetence, so everything that you'll do work will increase your competence, and you'll figure out what works and what doesn't work. And finally, the reward is uncapped, and you can get 10x, 100x reward from working at a startup versus going the traditional route. So, if I were you starting my career back in 2014, I believe, but in 2024, I would simply find a great startup to work at and go bust my ass there and try to make my impact to make that startup successful. If you like this video, like and subscribe and comment if you want to learn more of how to get a job at a startup, because it's different than kind of like a traditional company. And if that gets more traction, I would make a video about it. But thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck. I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.